OCD stands for Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. If, like me, you have ever wondered if you have OCD, then take a few minutes for this podcast. I'm Larry Fedoruk, and this is Later That Same Life. On my weekly podcast, topics, discussions, stories from our lives.
Season 11, Chapter 8.
OCD.
I've always wondered if I had OCD. Well, of course I don't. I have some habits, quirks, peculiarities, eccentricities, but they don't run my life. They make me, interesting. Certainly not OCD. Well, according to experts, those who live with obsessive-compulsive disorder can display mild, moderate, or severe symptoms. I've always wanted to talk about this on a podcast, but never did, till now. This podcast, inspired by a U.S. national TV ad I just saw, Howie Mandel talking about OCD and promoting an awareness and help website, NoCD.com.
I'm a comedian. Apparently, I know what funny is. But I also know what isn't funny. OCD. People throw the term OCD around like it's no big deal. But it's a severe and very common mental health condition that needs specialty treatment. If you or someone you know has reoccurring intrusive fears from OCD, go to NoCD.com to get evidence-based treatment.
I've known for a few years that Howie Mandel had OCD, that he was a germaphobe. Howie has come out, if that's the right term, as such in the last little while. Here's Howie on Bill Maher's podcast, Club Random, in 2022, explaining how it all started.
I had OCD, but how it was going to affect me was molded by when I was 5 years old. I was in Miami, and I was sitting on the beach, and I got bit by a sandfly. And the sandfly laid its larva in my hand. And then all over my body, I had these things growing under my skin, and they would scratch away. So my mom took me to a dermatologist. The dermatologist went nuts. He goes, "This is great, and we're having an international dermatology convention this week. Can I bring your son?" They brought me, and I was sitting in, it was kind of like, I guess it was a theater, and they put me on a gurney. They tied me down to the gurney. They took off my clothes. I'm standing there, lying there in my tighty-whities. And the guy explains that we haven't seen this in humans before. And people are asking questions. And what do you think you're going to do? He says, "I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to get rid of them with liquid nitrogen." I had no anesthesia or anything. And he starts dropping the liquid nitrogen on these bumps. And I remember a blood-curdling scream. And I look at my skin. It was sizzling. And these larva bumps were bubbling up, and they were blistering, like he was burning me alive. My mother screamed, ran up, ripped off they had me tied down so I wouldn't move under this thing, took me to the car and took me home, and it wouldn't take me to the doctor. And then every night what my mom would do, we would pick one, and she took a dry, rough cloth. Every night, at first it started really good, felt good, and she would rub it and rub it and rub it and rub it until my skin would break and bleed, and the larva would come out. And it took a year to get them all. We would do one a night, and they were all gone. From that time on, I never wanted to touch anything, and that embedded in my mind.
I'm glad to see Howie Mandel talking about it, especially since it affects him personally. I think there's still validity in a celebrity speaking out for a cause. It automatically draws attention to the subject, plus it makes it easier for others to be more open about it. I've known Howie Mandel for a long time. I don't actually know him now. I don't have his phone number. He doesn't have mine. If we bumped into each other on the street, he might remember me, he might not. When I was starting out many years ago as a stand-up comic at Yuck Yucks in Toronto, Howie Mandel was breaking out big time. He was still just a Toronto comic, but a hot ticket. Featured full-page articles in the papers, TV appearances. He was showcasing for big producers and packing the club. One night after I did a set, he told me that I was funny and I should stick with it. It's not that I needed the approval, but I've never forgotten the gesture. It meant a lot. Backstage at a comedy club is not always the big laugh fest one might think. Often it's bitter, competitive, and rife with insecurities. For someone to be nice to you, well, it stood out. Howie and I would talk occasionally, mostly just backstage. We never hung out. Both of our wives were named Terry. And other little silly things that are meaningless, but somehow lead to conversation. Several years later, when Howie was already a big international star, he was playing a gig just outside of Toronto in a big soft-seat venue. I bought a ticket, and I also knew the stage manager at the venue personally. He knew my history at Yuck Yucks. So I knock on the backstage door, and I ask if it would be okay if I just hung out in the hallway for a bit until Howie showed up so that I could say hello. No problem. A bit later, I see Howie coming in, no entourage. So I say, "Hey, Howie, Larry Fedoruk, Yuck Yucks days." The recognition factor seemed pretty high, like he remembered me. He shook my hand. We talked for about 3 minutes, then he went on to his dressing room. A bit after that, I'm telling the story to someone, and they say, "What do you mean he shook your hand? He's a germaphobe. He doesn't shake hands." This was the first I'd heard about that. It was also way before we had invented the fist bump. And ever since I have wondered how painful it was for him to shake my hand. Yet he did it anyway. Or was he in a complete panic until he rushed to his dressing room to wash his hands 11 times? I don't know that, of course. But since that time in that hallway, I've always appreciated more that gesture. A kind word and a handshake. I guess they go a long way. That's my affinity to Howie Mandel. So when I saw him doing ads for OCD awareness, I appreciated it all that much more. I emphasize that OCD stands for Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. We abbreviate to initials a lot in our society, too much. OCD, ADHD, HIV, GMC, IBM. Eventually, they lose their meaning. Often the words themselves that they stand for are forgotten. This is obsessive compulsive disorder. What causes it? Well, medical science's best guess is chemical imbalances in the brain. And that is just a short layman's explanation, but it manifests itself in learned behavior. Key, learned behavior. Behavior that often becomes repetitive to ease our anxieties. And most of these behaviors are random. For example, let's say you have to walk into a big boardroom to make a big presentation and you're nervous and anxious. So you pause, you take 3 deep breaths, tell yourself that you got this, clear your throat and walk in. Well, that makes sense. But if, on the other hand, you relieve your anxieties by tapping on the door jamb 3 times, turning the doorknob counterclockwise, and then clicking your heels, well, then you're probably more likely on the disorder spectrum. And if you repeat the same routine because you're anxious about walking into any room, well, maybe it's a little bit more serious. Again, these are symptomatic behaviors of OCD, and they can be mild, moderate, or severe. Howie Mandel is a very successful entertainer. Like I said, I don't really know him. I don't know how much his OCD disrupts his happiness or personal life. But despite battling a disorder, he was able to succeed on several levels. He's still working, and by the way, still married to Terry. Melvin Udall, Jack Nicholson's character in the movie As Good as It Gets, was a very successful novelist, enjoyed the good life, including regularly going out to breakfast, as long as he brought his own plastic knife and fork. He was getting along, but he almost lost his chance at love because he was unable to step on any crack in the sidewalk.
I've got this, ailment. My doctor, a shrink that I used to go to all the time, says that in 50 or 60% of the cases, a pill really helps. I hate pills. Very dangerous thing, pills. Hate. I'm using the word hate here. About pills. Hate.
In some cases, medication can help OCD, the chemical imbalance in the brain. But not always. In other words, there's no magic pill. And it can be hereditary. Worldwide, OCD affects about 1% of the population. That's 80 million people, give or take. In North America, the rate is slightly higher at 1.2%. People 25 to 34 seem more susceptible, but otherwise OCD knows no age limits. OCD is almost equally split, male to female, or however you identify, but the behaviors often manifest themselves differently between men and women. So when do peculiar habits and eccentricities become OCD? Well, I would say instantly, as in they are one and the same. Once you exhibit the behaviors of a nature, it's a disorder. Severe debilitates your life. Moderate affects you and those around you. And mild, mild. Still OCD. OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. I'll show you mine if you show me yours. I think that I exhibit mild symptoms. Here's one. In my fridge and cupboards, all brand products have to be placed with the label facing forward, just like in the store. I justify it by saying to myself that I can instantly tell at a glance if a can of soup is mushroom or tomato. If I turn it properly when putting it in, then I don't have to turn it when I'm looking for soup. Makes sense to me. Isn't that just being practical? Also in the cupboard, cans, jars, and bottles have to be with cans, jars, and bottles, and boxes with boxes. Jam can't be next to the mustard. Vinegar can't be on the same shelf as peanut butter. Is that a mild symptom? Well, yeah, I guess, because I live alone, and I am at one with the system. But if I lived with someone, I know that I could not comfortably watch a movie with her, knowing that she had put a can of tuna in the cupboard backwards and next to the cornflakes. It would be all I could think about. I'd have to go correct it, then have a discussion with her. Then she'd have to see the error of her ways. And only then could we enjoy as good as it gets. In the latter scenario, my quirky grocery system goes from mild to moderate. If we break up, I guess it's severe. Here's one that I got over. Kind of. If someone dropped by and just threw their jacket on the back of a chair or hung it on a doorknob, it drove me nuts. I had to hang it in the front hall closet. Hey, Larry, don't worry, you don't have to hang that up. Oh, yes, I do. Conversely, if I go somewhere and they would say, just throw your coat anywhere, I couldn't do it. Anywhere? Well, yeah, where's your front hall closet with the free hanger? How about I throw it in there? So I'm almost over that one now. I'm okay with a jacket slung over a chair, but I do still think about it each time. Hey, look at that jacket on the back of the chair. I'm comfortable with that. I will not stress over it, and I can have a conversation about another topic with someone without thinking about the jacket. I'm healthy, 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 healthy. I cannot leave my house without having first made my bed. Justification? At night, I like getting into a made bed. I live alone, no one else is going to do it for me, so if I just do it before I leave, it's done. Healthy, I guess. But when I was at work, like doing a daily news talk show, and my mind would randomly wander from my guest, and I started to think, did I make my bed before I left the house today? Oh, yeah, I did. Good. Phew, that's good. Carry on. Otherwise, sorry folks, gotta leave. Go home, make the bed, back in an hour. Generally, I like order. Justification? I'm an artistic, creative individual. I like putting together visual settings in my home so that it's pleasant to look at and be in. I guess that's fine, until I realized that the little ceramic penguin always has to face due south, that my dad's vintage ice bucket has to have the handle facing the room and not the wall, and while you're at it, I changed my mind, hang up that coat. Again, living alone, it's good. It's as I like it. But if I was in this relationship, well, even Felix Unger's wife eventually just had to ask him to leave. The big revelation, which I then reverse engineered into a self-diagnosis of OCD, was a chair in my bedroom, a comfy chair, except I never sat in it. It was not for sitting. It's where I would casually toss a pair of jeans, sweatpants, a couple of t-shirts. Looks kind of messy. See? It's messy. I like messy, which means I'm not OCD. But then I realized that I had created a controlled mess to help convince myself that I did not require obsessive-compulsive order. In my own defense, Your Honor, may I present Exhibit A, the bedroom chair. That whole time, it was like I was building an alibi for a crime that I didn't realize I was committing. I'm surprised COVID didn't put me right over the edge. Complete obsessive hand-washing, mask-wearing, Clorox-wiping hermit. Right now I say I'm good at hand-washing, I'm attentive. Mask-wearing, Clorox-wiping is down to a minimum. COVID didn't feed my OCD, but it didn't kill it either. I've been having some fun talking about it here. OCD is often played for fun, even on Seinfeld.
She's this crazy woman who is convinced that my germs make her sick.
I'm germaphobe. I know what that's about. I'm a recovering germaphobe. 10 years.
What is this symbol?
It's a germ.
Hey, at heart, I'm a comedian. I think there's potential funny in just about anything. But maybe it's like Howie Mandel said in those commercials, it's not funny, especially for those who really suffer. I guess it's like any disorder, disease, ailment, or injury. If you have it, but you're able to get around and function as a human being, well, then you just deal with it. I've noticed getting older that I have a new normal about every 60 days. Wait, what? This hurts now? Well, I guess no more skydiving. Remember the old joke? The guy goes to the doctor and says, "Doc, my arm hurts when I do this." Doctor says, "Well, don't do that." That's me more and more, things that I no longer do or do differently. OCD can manifest in phobias or intrusive thoughts. I have a few of those. Intrusive thoughts are more common than you might think. For example, a new 12-story building just went up near me. I can't walk by it without imagining it suddenly collapsing. I don't know why. Maybe because I didn't think they should have put a building there in the first place and it blocks the sun. So maybe I'm wishing its demise. But in the 90 seconds it takes me to walk by, I always picture it suddenly collapsing. And I devise a plan in my head on which direction I should run to save myself. I don't think about it any other time except walking by. And I can't help it. I have intrusive thoughts all the time. What if I just robbed this bank right now? I think that speeding dump truck is going to jump the curb right into that bus shelter. It's not like I expect them to happen, I just see them happening. And I don't act on intrusive thoughts. I know better. I'm also a writer and a storyteller, so I can always just channel them into fiction if they keep coming back. So am I OCD? Odd, curious, different? Or OCD, obsessive-compulsive disorder? I don't know. I function. Mostly.
Later That Same Life is written, voiced, and produced by Larry Fedoruk. LarryFedoruk37@gmail.com. Subscribe to Larry's podcast YouTube channel. Get automatic notifications with each new episode.